Hawaii is a unique place, and there are many reasons for this. For example, Hawaii is an archipelago, or collection of islands, and it is one of the only two states not physically part of the continental American territory, and the only one not in North America. In fact, Hawaii is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,500 miles from the coast of California. Hawaii is also the newest state in the Union, officially becoming the 50th and so far final state on August the 21st, 1959. While each state definitely has their own distinct culture and traditions, the distance that separates Hawaii, as well as their long-standing history as an independent kingdom, resulted in the state having a very distinguished and unique culture, unlike no other in the US. As an archipelago at the halfway point of the Pacific Ocean between the United States and Southeast Asia, Hawaii has been an integral part of American naval history. Moreover, a critical component of why Hawaii became an American territory and later a state was much in due part to its extremely advantageous position. There are many physical or cultural markers of American naval history in Hawaii, such as prominent naval bases, the thousands of American sailors who live in the state, or even famous events like the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which led to the American entry into World War II. And unsurprisingly, one particular indication of this past, which relates to Pearl Harbor, are the actual sunken battleships from that attack, which still reside under Hawaii's waters. You see, during the assault, many American vessels were sunk or damaged, including several battleships. Many of these ships were able to be repaired and actually went on to serve in the subsequent war, but two famous battleships, the USS Arizona and the USS Oklahoma, had a much more unfortunate fate. And today, both battleships are submerged deep underwater the coast of Hawaii. However, each ship has an important story of its own to tell, featuring heartbreak as well as heroism, national tragedy, but also national triumph and unification. So join me as we discover the battleship graveyard that is Pearl Harbor. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Today, we will discover the history of Pearl Harbor, a topic so important, I insist you take the time to watch a more official documentary titled Remember Pearl Harbor on Magellan TV, featuring the in-depth story of this tragic moment in time. The film is genuinely touching and features amazing archival footage not available for us to use here on YouTube. It also covers many unexpected facts. For example, the USS Arizona still leaks oil into the ocean. This oil floating to the surface is known to many as black tears. Previously, I had no idea that the famous ship had over 1 million gallons of fuel in her tanks at the time of the attack. Now, usually, you'd have to pay to see this movie, but thanks to our sponsor, Magellan TV, all It's History fans can watch it free with my special link in the description. Let me explain. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers with the most varied history content available anywhere. Actually, 15 to 20 hours of new content is added each week, with a growing collection of 4K, high-definition content for no additional cost. So you'll never run out of something to watch. In addition to history, subscribers enjoy other extensive collections on science, true crime, travel, and more, with zero ads, anytime, anywhere, and on all major devices. Like I said before, for our viewers, the first month is totally free. Then after that, you can take advantage of an annual membership for $59.88. You only pay $4.99 per month for 3,500 hours worth of documentaries. So click that link in the bio to get your first full month free. And now, back to Hawaii's battleship graveyard. As was said before, both the USS Arizona and the USS Oklahoma are battleships with long-standing histories, but what they are most known for is how they were tragically sunk in the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a deadly surprise assault that killed over 2,400 Americans, sank 12 ships, and ended up being one of the worst attacks on American sovereignty. But what was the Pearl Harbor naval base and what made it so important? Well, for over a century, Pearl Harbor had been an an essential location for the U.S. Navy, far before Hawaii was an American state or even a territory. In the past, Pearl Harbor was called Waimomi, which translated to the Pearl Waters in the native Hawaiian language, due to the pearl oysters which were found there. Because of Hawaii's strategic position in the center of the Pacific Ocean, the U.S. Navy had been long pondering the benefits of putting a naval base there, as the U.S., which had been growing in economic, geopolitical, and military power, was now looking outward to the Pacific for things like free trade and overseas territories. Then in 1887, a treaty was signed giving the U.S. exclusive rights to Pearl Harbor, but the base itself wasn't actually built until the breakout of the Spanish-American War in 1898. As the U.S. fought the Spanish Empire in several Pacific islands the empire owned at the time, such as Guam and the Philippines. Then, when Hawaii became an American territory in 1900, after the monarchy was overthrown, the base was fully expanded, and by the time of the infamous attacks in 1941, Pearl Harbor was the headquarters of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Located on the southern Oahu Island, the base lies upon a partially artificial harbor on the coast of the island, which is shaped like a clover leaf. Within the harbor, there are about 10 square miles of navigable water, as well as 4 locks and many anchorages with one channel entrance connecting the bay to the ocean. But what caused Japan to attack Pearl Harbor, you ask? Well, throughout the 1930s, the US and Japan were the two most powerful nations in the Pacific, with both trying to overcome the other in dominance. The Japanese goal of imperialism against the US goal of free trade set the two countries on a collision course. As the Second World War unfolded across the world, and specifically in Asia, Japan invaded China, while the US gave support to the Chinese. Eventually, the Japanese then officially joined the Axis powers alongside Germany and Italy before continuing to conquer more land in Southeast Asia as Korea and further Chinese territories. This prompted the US to cut all economic ties with Japan and halt trade, most notably the sale and importation of essential resources like petroleum, which Japan desperately needed but actually relied upon the US for. So with the USSR occupied by a German invasion by mid-1941, it seemed war between the US and Japan was inevitable, and the question was simply a matter of when, not if. A question to be answered on the initially peaceful morning of December the 7th, 1941, when the Japanese Navy launched a massive surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, with the goal being to incapacitate the entire American fleet and knock them out of the Pacific War before they'd even entered. After 2 waves of attacks from Japanese bombers, they inflicted devastating damage upon the U.S. fleet. 8 American battleships were heavily damaged, with both the aforementioned Arizona and Oklahoma completely sunk. 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, as well as over 180 aircraft and other vessels or vehicles were damaged or destroyed. Most tragically, over 2,400 Americans had lost their lives. In fact, the only saving grace to this catastrophe, which allowed the U.S. to quickly join the war effort, was that 3 aircraft carriers and a division of cruisers and destroyers were not at Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack. Obviously, this event had a momentous impact on the trajectory of world history, as this is what forced the US to declare war on Japan and the rest of the Axis powers, officially entering World War II, with the American contribution proving to be absolutely critical to the eventual Allied victory. The tragic loss of life, as well as the destruction of the fleet, prompted a memorial to be built in honor of the fallen Americans, now standing as the Pearl Harbor National Memorial. Included in the whole memorial complex are sites that honor sunken ships like the USS Arizona, the USS Oklahoma, the USS Utah, as well as other museums, memorials, parks, and visitor centers. During the attack, there were 8 American battleships moored in the harbor at the location known as Battleship Row, where they unfortunately became sitting ducks for the Japanese bombers. Despite each ship taking heavy damage, 6 of the 8 ships were to be quickly repaired, and they eventually saw action in the Pacific theater of war. 2 of these ships, the USS Oklahoma and the USS Arizona, did not share this redemptive fate. Of the two vessels, the USS Arizona is the more famous, belonging to the Pennsylvania class of Super Dreadnought battleships as the second and final iteration. Built in 1915 at the Brooklyn, New York Naval Yard, the Arizona was officially commissioned on October the 17th, 1916. Upon commission, the Arizona was one of the most powerful weapons of war on the planet. She was fitted with 12 14-inch guns, 22 5-inch guns, and with a total length of 608 feet and a weight of 31,400 tons. The Arizona was the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy's fleet at the time. Despite the incredible muscle the U.S. Navy had with the Arizona, she did not see any combat during World War I due to the fact that she was powered by bunker fuel oil, which was scarce in the United Kingdom, where most of the American battleships were stationed during the Great War. Instead, the large battleship patrolled the east coast of the U.S. in case of a German attack. With that said, the Arizona did participate in a vital part of the war when it was part of the convoy that escorted the George Washington with President Woodrow Wilson aboard to the Paris Peace Conference in early 1919, where the terms of peace were negotiated. During the interwar period, the Arizona was upgraded a few times with new armor, engines, and munitions. Afterwards, the Arizona was switched to the Pacific Fleet as a possible war with Japan came a real likelihood over time, in which the Arizona would be needed most. As was said before, the Arizona was moored in Pearl Harbor Battleship Row at the time of the attack, but she was also particularly targeted by the Japanese due to her immense firing power as well as size. Right at the beginning of the attack, 10 Japanese torpedo bombers assaulted the ship, scoring 4 hits and 3 close misses. The first hit punched through the deck and detonated in the captain's pantry, while the next 2 hit the port edge and the port rear anti-aircraft 5-inch guns respectively. The third and most devastating was a 1,760-pound shell which penetrated the front deck and detonated, igniting the forward magazines and causing a gigantic explosion. The blast was so powerful that it reportedly lifted the entire 31,000-ton battleship out of water. It also knocked down the forward turrets, conning tower, foremast, and funnel, while also blowing apart the ship's side and interior, essentially leaving the ship in 2 pieces. Blowback from the explosion sent debris onto the adjacent Ford Island and even exhausted fires on nearby ships, but the Arizona itself was left engulfed in massive flames, which lasted for 2 days, leading to the most iconic photo taken of the Pearl Harbor attack. The sinking of the Arizona claimed the lives of 1,177 crewmen, which was about 78% of the total crew, as well as nearly half of the death toll from the entire Pearl Harbor attack. Sadly, over 900 bodies of those fallen soldiers had to be left and entombed in the Arizona, as retrieval was impossible. Well, there was some debate over what exactly in the forward magazine was ignited by the Japanese ordnance to cause such a catastrophic explosion. The reality of the matter was that the majority of the battleship was now sunk underwater, with the few unsubmerged parts still burning. After several rescue missions, the Arizona was considered a total loss, as it was damaged beyond repair. So much so that it was not even raised out of the water like other sunken ships from the attack. The parts of the ship that remained above water were taken apart and salvaged, while the rest stayed on the sea floor. In 1950, the U.S. Navy then symbolically recommissioned the Arizona. 8 years later, the U.S. Congress passed legislation to build a memorial to honor the late battleship. Since no federal funds were given for its creation, the construction had to rely on donations. Luckily, Elvis Presley hosted a concert in 1961 with all the profits going to the Arizona Memorial. Then, by 1962, it was finished. The memorial itself is a floating building that lies just above the hull of the ship, only accessible by boat. Designed by Austrian-American architect Alfred Preis, the memorial is a very unique-looking structure made of concrete and steel. The shape of the building has much meaning behind it as well, with the top of the structure dipping in the center before rising up at the other ends. The low part in the middle is meant to symbolize the dark period of American history, with the rise sides representing the eventual American victory at the end of World War II. The 21 open windows were also meant to represent the 21-gun salute. Today, the memorial rests with its bright white exterior standing out in the middle of the dark blue water, alongside a tall American flag looming over the entire complex. Each year, around 2 million people visit the USS Arizona Memorial and pay their respects. While not as famous or well known as the Arizona, the USS Oklahoma had a very similar story as the battleship sunk during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The ship itself belonged to the Nevada class of battleships built in Camden, New Jersey, and upon completion, she weighed 27,500 tons. Afterwards, the Oklahoma was commissioned in May of 1916 and served in the First World War, protecting Allied convoys from German U-boats as they crossed the Atlantic. After the war's end, the Oklahoma, alongside the Arizona, escorted President Wilson on his many trips to France for the post-war negotiations. Throughout the next 2 decades, the Oklahoma operated in both the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, conducting several missions and trips such as exercises and drills along the west coast of South America. The vessel also took cruises to Australia and New Zealand, and even saved refugees from the Spanish Civil War. Much like the Arizona, the Oklahoma was upgraded and improved, with the ship being sent to Philadelphia Navy Yard in 1927. Along with an improved battle-worthiness, the Oklahoma's appearance was significantly changed. Following the end of the 1930s, she permanently joined the Pacific Fleet and was stationed out of Pearl Harbor as the U.S. Navy moved its main Pacific base from San Pedro, California to Hawaii. At the time of the attack, of course, the Oklahoma was moored on Battleship Row. At the start of the strike, the Oklahoma was targeted by several Japanese bombers who were able to hit the battleship with 3 torpedoes. The first 2 hit the middle of the ship near the waterline, causing some damage but not breaching the hull. However, the 3rd torpedo hit the exact same spot, and this one did penetrate, destroying some boiler rooms and fuel bunkers after detonating into a large explosion. With a massive hole now torn into the side of the ship, the Oklahoma filled with water and then capsized to port, with her starboard side now completely out of the water. As the crew abandoned ship, many men were mowed down by Japanese machine gun fire as they attempted to swim to safety. The sinking Oklahoma was also hit with an estimated 5 more torpedoes, causing continual damage. And because the Oklahoma had capsized, there were still hundreds of men trapped within the ship with no way to get out, leading to one of the greatest rescue missions in American military history. During this day of national tragedy, many individuals rose to the occasion, performing duties above and beyond for their fellow countrymen. A shining example of this was a man named Julio de Castro, a civilian who worked at the Naval Yard. As the attack was concluding and the first responders rushed to the scene, de Castro was near the Oklahoma and heard the faint sound of sailors screaming and banging against the hull of the battleship they were now trapped in. De Castro sprung into action, gathering some fellow workers and attempted to save the entombed crew. For the next 2 days, De Castro and his crew worked tirelessly to open parts of the hull and let the sailors out. This was particularly difficult as the Oklahoma's hull ranged anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 16 inches of steel, depending on the spot. At first, they used cutting torches, but this was a fire hazard as the paint on the steel was extremely flammable. So they switched to chipping guns, a tool that uses pressurized chisels to hammer through the steel. However, it would take a considerably longer amount of time to just make one successful cut. Furthermore, De Castro and his crew had no idea what lay beneath the hole they were breaking through. Well, they could have been piercing holes into compartments that held the trapped soldiers. They also could have very well been puncturing ammunition lockers, fuel storages, or other explosive material. Luckily, the commander of the neighboring ship, the USS Maryland, was able to lend De Castro a schematic plan of the Oklahoma, and they avoided accidentally setting off any explosives. Even still, the rescue mission was a tough grueling and unforgiving process. De Castro and his crew heroically saved 32 sailors trapped in the hull, but overall, the result of the Japanese attack was shocking, as out of the Oklahoma's total crew of 1,400 men, 429 were killed. Because of the incredible amount of damage that the Oklahoma received, the battleship was unable to be fully repaired, and still, the massive ship lays capsized in the water. It was also a serious navigational hazard. As a result, the Navy decided to salvage what they could before pulling the remains out of the water. It took over 8 months to turn the Oklahoma right side up, and large air pumps were used to push out the water while oil was poured into the hull to balance it upright. Once the ship was no longer submerged underwater, a special Navy crew had to perform the harrowing task of removing all of the human remains. Afterwards, the ship's guns, ammunition, and machinery were taken out as the Oklahoma was officially decommissioned on September the 1st, 1944. After being repaired enough to sail, the battleship was sold to a private firm called Moore Dry Dock Company from Oakland, California. However, upon making its final trip from Hawaii to California, a massive sea storm hit, causing mass confusion between the tugboats pulling the old battleship. Among the chaos, the still damaged Oklahoma sunk in the water where it still lays today. The exact location is not known, but the battleship sunk somewhere off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii. Exactly 66 years after the disastrous attack, a memorial was built to honor the USS Oklahoma on December the 7th, 2007 at Ford Island. The memorial itself is a beautiful design with 429 white marble columns spread out across the grass in the shape of a V, in order to symbolize the ship's sailors manning the rails. Every column is also dedicated to one of the fallen sailors or Marines, with their names engraved accordingly. Well, both the USS Arizona and the USS Oklahoma lay at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Hawaii. The history behind each ship would not be forgotten, suggesting that Hawaii's battleship graveyard does not exist in vain. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Hit that subscribe button and don't miss our playlist about the history of ships. Until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.